Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Metropolis Radio, and today we are talking about one of my all-time favorite Pixar movies. Now, fun fact about this movie, I actually didn't pay to go see it in the theaters. What happened was I got like a voucher in the mail that, it was something like I could go to an advanced screening of this movie at my local I know it was in a David. I think it was a Regal. I think it was a Regal theater because it was a combination between Regal and Dave and Buster's. It was a little weird, but we are talking about Cars, and more specifically, this article from Comic Book Resources. I actually didn't know this, but why is Cars the black sheep of the Pixar family? Cars doesn't get the lofty reception many of its Pixar contemporaries enjoy. Let's explore how Cars is the Pixar series that never gets pole position, which has always seemed kind of odd to me because I really liked the first Cars movie, and even the third Cars movie was really, really good. We don't talk about that bullshit one where they go on where it's like this vast global conspiracy and Mater becomes a super spy. No, that movie does not exist. It exists in an alternate dimension, damn it, and we're gonna pretend that for the entirety of this video. Pixar has one of the most iconic libraries of any film studio, and it's one that continues to grow with the release of Turning Red earlier this year and Lightyear on the way. However, there is one franchise that lives under Pixar's label that is not looked back on as favorably as the rest, Cars. Well, maybe to you it's not looked back on as fondly, but to me, it is looked back on very fondly. The first Cars film was released in 2006 and soon became the first Pixar franchise after Toy Story to not only get a sequel, but to complete a trilogy as well. That's no easy feat. The trilogy has grossed over $1.4 billion worldwide, and the franchise is an absolute monster in merchandise and toy sales. And yet, Cars does not get the love and adoration that many Pixar films before and since have enjoyed. While the majority of Pixar's library are considered absolute classics that can be enjoyed by children and adults alike, Cars seems to be accepted as a quote-unquote kids-only affair. According to who? Who is saying that Cars is only for children? I love that they don't even cite where they're pulling that from. It almost seems like this author is really pulling that out of his ass here. Damn it. Let's explore the curious legacy of the Cars franchise and how these films fit into the grand tapestry of Pixar. The first Cars film is not a bad film by any stretch of the imagination. It's actually a very charming and engaging picture whose bright animation, quirky jokes, and heartfelt story are sure to engage any young mind. In fact, if we're being 100% honest, the first Cars movie is just an animated version of Doc Hollywood with Marty McFly himself, Michael J. Fox. If we're being entirely honest, I like the first Cars movie, but we do need to acknowledge that it's basically an animated version of Doc Hollywood. However, it's within the larger context surrounding its release that the cracks begin to show, and its public perception makes more sense. Prior to Cars, every single Pixar film was an instant classic. It's difficult to describe just how well Pixar was doing. Its success rate was unheard of for any film studio, never mind any animated film studio. And then Cars came out, and it was just good. Not great, not awful, just good. That is your opinion, sir. In my opinion, the first Cars movie was freaking fantastic, and Cars 3 was a good movie. It really was. When they made Lightning McQueen the next Doc Hudson, and for those of you already thinking, remember that movie that must not be named exists in an alternate dimension. It somehow crossed over into the ether to join our dimension, but we are not naming that movie by name. And good compared to great is still a noticeable blip. In Pixar's first 15 years of making films, Cars is the only one to get below 90% on Rotten Tomatoes. Then, in its 16th year, Pixar released the movie that shall not be named. And that really didn't help. Yes, it did not help that movie that shall not be named crossed from the other dimension and was absolute garbage. The film that must not be named was the first Pixar film to get a Rotten rating on the site. Well, no shit. It was the first Pixar film that did not work for families and only worked for children. That's not a bad thing at all, but it feels strange for Pixar. The trilogy was then capped off with the release of Cars 3, the lowest grossing of the three, and which holds the unique achievement of being the only fresh rating Pixar that's not fully certified fresh, being stuck at 69%. There are numerous reasons why Cars doesn't land on the same level as most other Pixar properties. It can't escape the stigma of being the only Pixar series that doesn't reach the highs the audiences know that the studio is more than capable of. Especially with the movie that must not be named, a film that does not try to be more than the sum of its parts, and in many ways a betrayal of the gentle nature of the first and third installments. However, even with Cars and Cars 3, the themes of the film are built around old-fashioned rural America and NASCAR racing, and that's just not that accessible to general audiences. One of the great tricks many Pixar films employ is using unique settings and characters to tell universal stories, but Cars is not that. I would argue the first and third Cars movies do fit into that role. Is that, you know, Lightning McQueen comes on the track, and he's the young guy that's trying to show up all the old timers. And by the way, going back to their point about these movies being built around old-fashioned rural America and NASCAR racing, the guy that voiced King in the very first Cars movie was voiced by Richard Petty, and they even went so far as to model King after one of Richard Petty's old race cars. For those that don't know, I know a lot of you racing fans watching this going, "Well, I knew that. That's very common knowledge." But understand, 95% of the people who watch Cars are not the biggest racing fans. If we're being 100% honest. But still, okay. Getting back to Cars, yeah, that where I tangented from. One of the great tricks many Pixar films employ is using unique settings and characters to tell universal stories, but Cars is not that. Well, the first movie was basically, you know, forcing Lightning McQueen to stop and smell the roses. You know, quit being so fast paced and learn to fucking enjoy the scenery once in a while. You know, that was a great thing. And then you get to Cars 3. And now the roles are reversed. Now Lightning McQueen is the old man that has to compete with the up and coming racers. You know, he's now put in the same position that King was put in the first movie. So he has to learn how to cope with it, and he has to do either one of two things. Either he has to learn how to beat them, or he has to become the next Doc Hudson. And ultimately, by the end of Cars 3, he decides to become the next Doc Hudson of, well, I am clearly past my prime. It's time to give the new kid a shot kind of thing. Even the best of them are about something that doesn't appeal to a lot of people, and it's strange that the films never gear themselves to do that. That's not to say basing a film around NASCAR racing is an inherently bad idea. It's simply that to fully appreciate it at its best, audiences need to be clued into a very niche subject matter. It's arguably why Cars as a franchise does better at the It's arguably why Cars as a franchise does better at the domestic box office than the international one, and why the biggest global grosser of the three was the spy flick for kids, the movie that shall not be named. That's the only description that we're giving it. Cars is a curious series of films, and while it does make it easier to talk about, it becomes clearer why this has never been one of Pixar's favorite children. However, that does not stop the series from endlessly printing money through its merchandise. The franchise shows no signs of stopping either, with Cars on the Road just down the road on Disney+. And I accidentally clicked on another link. But that's okay, we came right back to it. We'll also remember that the Cars franchise, you know, the Cars series was Andrew Stanton's baby. There were only 2 series at Pixar that Andrew Stanton genuinely cared about. That was Toy Story and Cars, and that was it. So could a Cars 4 happen? In my opinion, no, because Andrew Stanton is no longer at Pixar. So you're gonna get a very different feeling. It's like what happened with Toy Story 4. That was made in a post Andrew Stanton Pixar, and we all know how that turned out. In my opinion, Toy Story 4 was a complete fucking disaster and didn't need to be made to begin with. I'll argue the same thing for a Cars 4 if they're thinking it. Cars 4 simply does not need to be made. But why is Cars the black sheep of the Pixar family? I have no idea why it's the black sheep of the Pixar family, because I remember really enjoying it growing up. The only Cars movie I do not like is the movie that shall not be named. Cars 3 should have been Cars 2. I think had Cars been a duology of released Cars and then Cars 3, I don't think there would have been an issue, but because of the release of the movie that shall not be named, I think that tainted Cars a hell of a lot more. And guys, that's pretty much all I got for you. If you stuck around this long, thanks so much for doing so. And if you've been following me along on video, I'm terrible at ending these videos, so I will just see you guys next time.